Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Melanie.
Glad to have you here to talk about offsite considerations for Safe Sanctuaries, which are very important because a lot of times we forget when we take children and youth and older vulnerable adults off of site, things can happen and we have to be prepared. So I have a few questions for you. What are a few things that leaders should consider when planning for offsite activities and ministries?
Great question, and really becoming more and more relevant because there's been such a tremendous movement to get the church out in the community, you know, that really that is where some tremendous ministry can happen. And really when you're considering Safe Sanctuaries as you travel away from your home church site, it really starts with being proactive about transportation. You need to be able to think about the vehicles that you'll use, caring for those vehicles, and putting your children and youth in as safe a position as possible. So it sounds strange, but vehicle maintenance, making sure that your tires are good, your oil's changed, having folks at the church that pay attention to the quality of the vehicles that you use to transport folks. I would also lump insurance in there. I would also lump in background checks for any drivers, or approval for drivers if they're using a church vehicle. Also, since vehicles are a place where you could put somebody into a, one adult and one youth or one child situation, you need to consider how many vehicles you need to safely seat everybody so they got a seatbelt and not be alone with an adult by themselves. So either planning to have 2 adults per car, in addition to several children, or a couple of kids and a youth, all together in a vehicle with one driver, but then being very upfront with communication about, you're going to be with this adult in this car between point A and point B. And making sure that you communicate that not only with other church staff, but perhaps with parents as well, depending on the nature of the visit. So transportation is a big one.
And one of the things that you said about the 2 adults, they have to be unrelated, non-cohabitating adults.
Right, exactly.
The same everywhere we go.
Exactly. And something that I have found works in some situations is actually to kind of play around with cell phones or like CB radios, if you have those, that sometimes you can have a second adult that is in the car if you're in communication with them with a phone that's on a Bluetooth speaker or the phone speaker, so that another adult, even if they're outside the vehicle, can hear everything that's going on while you're inside the car.
Technology does help in that way, doesn't it?
It certainly can.
So sometimes traveling, where groups stay in hotels. So what are some basic guidelines for sleeping arrangements when a hotel is involved?
That's a great question. Because the sleeping guidelines do change, whether you're staying in a hotel versus like a dormitory style setting, or even, like sleeping on the church basement floor with air mattresses, which was always my favorite. But in hotels, really, if you can't have 2 adults in a room, along with more than 1 youth, you don't have any, is the general recommendation. So if you're in a situation where you've only got 1 adult leader, that adult leader needs to have their own room, and the youth need to have their own room as well. Now, of course, you're going to need to be proactive with some behavior covenants and talking about how the adult is still going to be able to provide some supervision and be able to check in on that room as they need to. But when you're in an overnight situation, you really, really want to avoid 1 adult being in a situation with any number of youth. Okay, and that would apply not only to the rooming, but also to the beds as well. If you're in a hotel room that's got a king-size bed, don't share that bed with anybody.
Well, that's good to know because we get that question quite a bit about how do we work this out, and those are good guidelines. When we travel with children and youth, there's always that possibility of an emergency. We don't want it to happen, but there's always that possibility. What are some of the best ways to prepare for and respond to emergencies?
Boy, I mean, depending on the nature of the emergency, you can prepare as much as humanly possible, and then see how you respond,
Exactly.
Some of the things that have been helpful for me are having medical information cards in multiple places. If I'm on a retreat or on a trip with youth or children and I've got if it's hard copies, I have an accordion file that is everybody's information all in one place. I've got a copy of it, and then one of my other adults has a copy of it as well, so that there's 2 copies on the trip, and we can do it that way. If you are a little tech savvy and want to use technology while you're traveling as well, scan all of the information that is turned into you at the church and get it saved into a Google Doc or a spreadsheet. And if you have a phone, smartphone, tablet, something that can get online, then you've got access to a searchable set of documents. Right. And it just gives you even another place that all of your materials can be. Also, go ahead and keep the contact information for parents very obvious on those forms. That you want to let parents into the loop as soon as possible as you travel towards somewhere. You also want to be able to touch base with church staff back at home. If you've got somebody that is in charge of administration or finance or insurance, to make sure that they're aware of the situation as well. You really want to, in any emergency situation, make sure that you invite others, much like other Safe Sanctuaries stuff. Invite other adults into it so that they know you are not alone in making choices or setting yourself up where you're by yourself responding to an emergency.
So planning is important.
Planning is very, very important.
Vital.
Yes.
Absolutely. So Chris, are there any special considerations for camping ministries that you would offer?
There's a couple of great connections that could be helpful. Discipleship Ministries has a director of camping and retreat ministries who is worth getting in touch with, as well as UMCRUM, the United Methodist Committee on Retreat and Camping Ministries. I perhaps messed up that acronym, but that's because I live in the world of acronyms. Anyways, those 2 folks are full of really, really good information. The place that my mind initially goes is when you're looking for camp staff. There's a temptation to have younger camp staff, and you really want to pay attention to the recommended 5-year age difference between those serving in leadership positions from the actual participants in the camp itself.
Well, great. Well, Chris, it's been great talking to you today. Appreciate your time and all that you put into your ministry with young people.
Thank you, Melanie. I appreciate you as well.